हाउस भी अपने तरीके से और इनोवेटिव बना।
Hello and welcome, I'm Joshua Barnes and you're watching NewsX World. Let's first take a look at our top stories. Donald Trump says that President Xi's trip to Vietnam is aiming to screw the United States. Chinese President Xi Jinping is next heading to Malaysia for the second leg of his East Asia tour, aiming to build relations amid global trade tensions. Meanwhile, China has ordered a halt on Boeing jet deliveries as the ongoing US trade war continues to escalate. Meanwhile, Trump has ordered immediate negotiations with South Korea, Japan and India, according to the South Korean acting president. China has accused the United States National Security Agency of launching advanced cyber attacks during the Asian Winter Games. China has slammed manipulation and hype over Chinese soldiers captured by Ukraine. Meanwhile, attacks have been reported by both Russia and Ukraine, reportedly leading to the death of an elderly Russian lady in the Kursk region. Egyptian officials have cited a positive turn in negotiations over a Gaza ceasefire, despite talks collapsing in Cairo. UN Chief Antonio Guterres says he is deeply alarmed over Sunday's strike on the Al Ali Arab hospital in the enclave. Iran has said that military capabilities are red lines in US talks over a potential nuclear deal. A further meeting is scheduled for next Saturday after direct talks in Oman last weekend. The UN has warned that ignoring Sudan refugees will have catastrophic consequences. This comes ahead of a meeting of diplomats in London later, though representation from the army and rebel forces will not be present. The Department of Education has frozen funding worth $2.3 billion for Harvard. It comes as the university rejected numerous demands from the Trump administration, which is cracking down on what it says is anti-Semitism on college campuses. Chinese President Xi Jinping ended his visit to Vietnam by paying tribute to revolutionary leader Ho Chi Minh and attending the launch of a major railway project linking the two countries. The visit capped 2 days of diplomacy aimed at deepening economic and political ties amid rising US tariffs. China and Vietnam signed 45 cooperation agreements covering supply chains, maritime patrols and artificial intelligence. Xi is now headed to Malaysia and Cambodia in a trip that marks his first overseas journey of the year. The visit to Malaysia comes at the invitation of King Sultan Ibrahim and it's Xi's second official trip to the country since 2013. He's expected to hold talks with the King and Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim. China has remained Malaysia's largest trading partner since 2009. Meanwhile, Xi's meeting in Hanoi drew attention in Washington, with President Trump commenting that the talks were trying to figure out how to screw the United States. Moving on, and in a sharp response to escalating trade tensions, China has reportedly instructed its airlines to suspend all future deliveries of Boeing aircraft. Sources close to the matter say Beijing is also telling Chinese carriers to halt any purchases of aircraft-related equipment and parts from American suppliers. This move follows the US imposing tariffs as high as 145% on Chinese goods under President Donald Trump's direction. Meanwhile, China's foreign ministry says the country will focus on rebuilding stronger trade ties with friendly nations and remain an attractive destination for global investment. At a press briefing, ministry spokesperson Lin Jian emphasized China's commitment to cooperation over confrontation during the ongoing China International Consumer Products Expo in Hainan. Over in South Korea, officials are responding to trade uncertainty with major action. The government has unveiled plans to inject nearly $5 billion more into its vital semiconductor sector by 2026, aiming to shield the industry from the impact of rising US tariffs. Back in the States, legal opposition to the tariffs is gaining traction. A legal advocacy group has asked the US Court of International Trade to block the sweeping measures, arguing that President Trump exceeded his authority. The Liberty Justice Center filed the lawsuit on behalf of 5 American businesses that rely on imports from affected countries. A similar case is also underway in Florida federal court. And finally, South Korea's acting President Han Duck-soo says President Trump has apparently directed his team to kick off immediate tariff talks with South Korea, Japan and India. Speaking to reporters, Han confirmed the discussions are underway regarding how the US plans to implement reciprocal tariffs and what negotiation topics will be on the table. China has accused the US National Security Agency of launching advanced cyber attacks on major Chinese sectors during February's Asian Winter Games. Authorities in Harbin added 3 NSA agents to a wanted list, accusing them of targeting energy, transport, defence and firms like Huawei. The agents were named as Catherine Wilson, Robert Snelling and Stephen Johnson. State media also linked US universities, including Virginia Tech and UC, to the attacks, though offered no specific evidence. Beijing's foreign ministry confirmed the allegations and demanded Washington stop smears and attacks against China. The US has yet to comment. The claims come as trade tensions mount between the two powers, with film imports paused and warnings issued to Chinese travellers. Here is what Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Lin Jian had to say.
在第9届亚冬会期间，美国政府针对赛事的信息系统和黑龙江省内的关键信息基础设施开展了网络攻击，对中国关键信息的基础设施、国防、金融、社会、生产以及公民的个人信息安全造成了严重危害，性质十分恶劣。中方谴责美国政府的上述恶意网络行为。
Well, we now bring you some breaking news from the Indo-Pacific region, and the Philippines Armed Forces said on Tuesday that the US Navy Marine Expeditionary Ship Interdiction System is in the country and will be used in the upcoming annual joint military drills. More than 14,000 Philippine and US soldiers will be participating in the upcoming Balikatan shoulder-to-shoulder exercises, which will focus on enhancing maritime, territorial and coastal defences. The drills will start on April the 21st until May the 9th and will also include some soldiers from Australia and Japan. The drills will include integrated air and missile defence, counter-landing live exercises, maritime strike and humanitarian assistance. The annual joint exercises come amid an ongoing escalation between the Philippines and China over contested resource-rich islands in the South China Sea. We head now to North America, and Harvard University is pushing back against demands from the Trump administration, rejecting what it calls government overreach that would compromise its independence. The Trump administration has since frozen $2.3 billion in federal funding to the university. The move comes after the Education Department said it was reviewing a total of $9 billion in federal contracts and grants awarded to Harvard. According to analysts, the review is part of a broader crackdown by the administration, which says universities have failed to address rising anti-Semitism on campuses, especially after recent pro-Palestinian protests. A Department of Education task force on anti-Semitism accused Harvard of having a troubling entitlement mindset, suggesting the university expects federal funding without properly upholding civil rights laws. In yesterday's letter, Harvard President Alan Garber said the administration's demands would allow the government to control the Harvard community and threaten the university's role as a private institution. He said no government should decide what private universities teach, who they hire, or what they research. The White House defended the funding freeze, with spokesman Harrison Field saying President Trump is working to make higher education great again by ensuring taxpayer money does not support what it calls racially motivated discrimination or violence. In response to the potential financial shortfall, Harvard is reportedly planning to borrow $750 million from Wall Street. We head now to the Middle East, and Egypt's top media official says there's been a positive turn in ceasefire hostage deal talks between Israel and Hamas as mediated discussions with Qatar continue. Hamas official says group likely to respond to Israel truce proposal within 48 hours. Meanwhile, Gaza's last fully operational hospital, Al Ali Arab, was destroyed in an Israeli strike. The IDF said the site was used by Hamas as a command centre. Footage showed flames and patients fleeing. One injured child died during the evacuation. The Episcopal Diocese of Jerusalem confirmed. Let's listen in to what some of the victims have had to say.
ولسه دوب روح ملوش 10 دقايق اجته حسبنا الله ونعم الوكيل هالصاروخ وفتتهم كلياتهم. هو استشهد وابنه مالك استشهد ومرته صاوبت وبعد وبنته صاوبت وابنه الله يشفيه يا رب راحت عينه وفي كسرين في رجله. حسبنا الله ونعم الوكيل. ايش بقى يساوي؟ بقى يبيع متس شراب الثلج. ايش بقى يساوي؟ لا بقى يصنع صواريخ ولا بقى يصنع بواريد ولا شيء. وايش ذنب الطفل المالك هذا؟ عاش انولد في الحرب ومات في الحرب، ما شافش يوم حلو من حياته.
كل يوم مجازر، كل يوم شهداء، مش عقد ابني ولا عقد ابن ابني، كل يوم اطفال بكم. ايش ذنبه النايم الطفل جنب ابوه؟ هاي
الطفل هذا انولد في الحرب؟
انولد في الحرب ومات في الحرب، سنه 4 شهور عمره. سنه 4 شهور عمره.
Well, the World Health Organization called the strike a violation of international law. UN Chief Antonio Guterres and UK officials echoed the condemnation, saying attacks on medical sites must stop. The hospital had been serving as a critical facility after destruction of other hospitals in Gaza. Over 50,000 people have died in Gaza since October the 7th, 2023, according to the Hamas-run health ministry. Meanwhile, Hamas are reportedly holding over 50 hostages, leading to the resumption of action by Israel last month. China is pushing back against claims that it's being drawn into Russia's war in Ukraine, calling the controversy over captured Chinese nationals manipulation and hype. This response comes after Ukraine paraded 2 Chinese prisoners of war during a press conference. The captured soldiers said they hoped to be swapped and warned other Chinese nationals against joining the conflict. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky had claimed that hundreds of Chinese nationals are fighting alongside Russian forces on the front lines. But Beijing is distancing itself from the matter. A foreign ministry spokesperson said China is verifying the details and urged all parties to avoid politicizing the situation. He stressed that Beijing has repeatedly warned its citizens to stay away from war zones and that any consular cases will be handled in accordance with Chinese law. Well, meanwhile, a Ukrainian drone attack on Russia's Kursk city has killed an 85-year-old woman and injured 9 others, according to regional authorities. Well, joining us to discuss these developments is Jim Rice, a professor of international law, who's joining us from Vigan in the Philippines. Jim, the first thing I'd like to bring up is this conversation around Chinese soldiers fighting with Russia against Ukrainian forces. Beijing, as we've heard, distancing themselves from this situation. Do you think this is an isolated incident or a few hundred potentially soldiers, or is this a larger problem of Chinese involvement in the Russia-Ukraine war?
Well, apart from what we know about the captured Chinese soldiers and the other 100 or so soldiers that the government of Ukraine is alleging, we do know that the PRC has been supporting Russia in many different ways in terms of supplying weapons and non-lethal supplies to Russia. And so, given all of this, I would regard their stories at this point as being fabrications. They're lying.
Yes, Jim, looking at this, of course, potential geopolitical ramification of China, one of the world's biggest superpowers, potentially being further involved in this conflict. We know the United States, of course, have been involved in negotiations as well. What doors does this potentially open, given ongoing US-China trade disputes as well?
That's really an interesting question. I see that there are a couple of questions right there. The first pertains exclusively to Ukraine, Russia, and Trump's alleged or apparent negotiations. I believe just today or yesterday, Trump basically falsely accused Zelensky once again of having started the Ukraine war. This is in contradiction of all known facts. Trump is again telling lies. Zelensky did not start the Ukraine war. Vladimir Putin did. And it seems to me that Trump is forcing Zelensky into a fake peace, and it must be resisted by the European community.
Yes, Jim, now, and to bring an end to the discussion, sorry to cut you off there, we do have to look at these strikes which have gone on, these reported strikes, allegedly an 85-year-old woman killed in the Russian Kursk region from a Ukraine drone attack. There have also been reports of Russian strikes in the Sumy region following the reported deadly attacks over the weekend in which 35 people were killed. What do these strikes tell you about the ongoing conflict?
Well, the obvious thing that tells me is that Putin is not negotiating in good faith. Putin is trying to carry on this war regardless, knowing that he can, because Trump doesn't care. Trump is basically trying to force Zelensky into the position of capitulating, and essentially Trump is trying to force Zelensky out of office, which is exactly what Putin has been demanding all along. I believe you asked something about China, though. That's an interesting question. Can you rephrase that, please?
Unfortunately, Jim, we don't have any more time, but thank you very much for joining us and providing your insights. As the Russia-Ukraine war continues to develop, we will be here bringing you all of the latest information. We now move to Africa, and senior officials are gathering in London, aiming to chart a pathway to peace for Sudan on the second anniversary of its brutal civil conflict, but without the presence of the warring parties. Dubbed the Forgotten War, the conflict which erupted on April the 15th, 2023 between Sudan's regular army and the paramilitary rapid support forces in a power struggle between rival generals, has created what the United Nations describe as the world's worst hunger and displacement crisis. The UN chief has said in a statement that ignoring Sudan refugees will have catastrophic consequences. Additionally, the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, Filippo Grandi, also stressed on how important it is to address this crisis, and the world must take every step to end it. There are also increasing fears that the tensions will spill over Sudan's borders and stir further instability in the impoverished Horn of Africa region. More than 13 million people have been uprooted and tens of thousands killed, with both sides accused by the United States of committing atrocities. Meanwhile, the United Nations have said that between 60,000 and 80,000 households, or up to 400,000 people, have been displaced from Sudan's Zamzam camp in North Darfur after it was taken over by the Rapid Support Forces. Let's listen in to what the UNHCR Regional Director for West and Central Africa has had to say.
Alors, à la date d'aujourd'hui, ce qu'on a comme information, c'est qu'à peu près la crise, le conflit, la guerre a déplacé près de 13 millions de Soudanais, que ce soit à l'intérieur ou à l'extérieur du pays. Et
a spokesman for Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, Ali Mohammed Naini, has said that the country's national security and defence and military power are among the red lines which cannot be discussed or negotiated under any circumstances. This comes after the United States and Iran began talks on nuclear talks in Muscat, Oman, according to Iranian state media on Monday. Foreign Ministry spokesperson Ismail Bagay confirmed the meetings are ongoing following what both sides described as positive and constructive initial discussions over the weekend. When asked if the US options for a response include a military strike on Tehran's nuclear facilities, US President Donald Trump said of course it does. Trump said the Iranians need to move fast to avoid a harsh response because they're fairly close to developing a nuclear weapon. Here is what Trump said.
I want them to be a rich, great nation. The only thing is, one thing, simple, it's really simple, they can't have a nuclear weapon. And they got to go fast because they're fairly close to having one. And they're not going to have one. And if we have to do something very harsh, we'll do it. And I'm not doing it for us, I'm doing it for the world. And these are radicalized people, and they cannot have a nuclear weapon.
Well, Saturday's high-level talks marked a rare moment of direct engagement between the two adversaries, with the US delegation led by President Trump's Middle East envoy Steve Witkoff and Iran represented by their Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi. Both nations have agreed to continue negotiations later this week, though details remain tightly under wraps. Oman has long served as a diplomatic bridge between Tehran and the West, hosting back-channel efforts that laid the groundwork for previous nuclear agreements. Despite the stakes, both sides appear committed to keeping the door open for now. Moving on, and in a sweeping crackdown on organised crime, Turkey's Interior Minister has announced the arrest of over 230 suspects, most of them within Turkey. At a press conference earlier today, Interior Minister Ali Yerlikaya revealed that 234 high-level members of a criminal organisation were taken into custody, 225 in Turkey and 9 abroad. The coordinated raids took place simultaneously across 5 countries: the Netherlands, Germany, Spain, Belgium and of course Turkey. Authorities also collaborated with several other nations, including France and the UK, ahead of the operation. Officials seized an astonishing 21.2 tonnes of drugs during the bust. The suspects face a range of serious charges, including drug trafficking and money laundering. Minister Yerlikaya called it a massive international network, underlining the scale and reach of the operation. At least 3 police officers were killed and 16 others injured when a roadside bomb struck their bus in Pakistan's Balochistan province on Tuesday. The vehicle carrying around 40 officers was targeted in Mastung district, about 40 kilometres south of Quetta. It was a roadside IED blast, said local official Raya Mohammed Akram. 2 of the injured are in a critical condition, officials have confirmed. No group has claimed responsibility, but the Baloch Liberation Army, which frequently targets security forces, is suspected. The region has seen escalating violence in recent years amid a long-running separatist insurgency. Armed groups have killed more than 200 people this year alone in Balochistan and Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. Moving on now, and Meta chief and co-founder Mark Zuckerberg has taken the stand in a landmark US antitrust trial in which his social media juggernaut stands accused of abusing its market power to acquire Instagram and WhatsApp before they could become competitors. Federal Trade Commission attorneys argue that Facebook, since renamed Meta, devoured what it saw as competitive threats. Zuckerberg was shown an internal Facebook email from 2011 that warned Instagram was a hit on smartphones and could easily copy what his social network offered. The case against Meta was originally filed in December 2020 during the first Trump administration, and all eyes were on whether he would ask the FTC to stand down. The Meta case could now see the owner of Facebook forced to divest Instagram and WhatsApp, which have grown into global powerhouses since their buyouts. Moving back to the Indo-Pacific region, and Singapore's parliament has been dissolved as Prime Minister Lawrence Wong prepares for his first major electoral test since succeeding Lee Hsien Loong last year. The president has dissolved the parliament following advice from Wong. The national election is set to be a significant moment in Singapore's politics as Wong faces increased pressure after the Lee family's long-standing dominance in the government. Nomination day is scheduled for April the 23rd, with the election date to be announced later. This election will see 97 seats contested, with a voting system that critics argue favours the ruling People's Action Party, which has held power since 1959. The opposition Workers' Party, which made notable gains in 2020, is expected to make further strides, with other smaller parties also preparing for the contest. Back to North America, and Harvey Weinstein is back on trial in New York this week, facing a retrial of his landmark 2020 conviction that was overturned last year. Jury selection is now underway and could take up to a week. The disgraced movie mogul was originally convicted of criminal sexual assault and third-degree rape, but saw the verdict tossed after an appeals court ruled that uncharged testimony had unfairly swayed the jury. This retrial brings a key difference: a new accuser with an added charge not present in the first case. Weinstein, who also faces a separate conviction in Los Angeles, maintains his innocence and has pled not guilty. Meanwhile, the 73-year-old producer's health has become his island. He has cited severe conditions and ongoing treatment for leukemia and diabetes as reason for an expedited trial. Staying back in the Indo-Pacific region, and Japanese engineers have begun a delicate operation to remove a second sample of radioactive debris from the damaged Fukushima nuclear plants. The debris is part of around 880 tonnes of hazardous material left behind after a massive tsunami triggered a meltdown at the facility in 2011, one of the worst nuclear accidents in history. Tokyo Electric Power Company, or TEPCO, confirmed the trial operation began at 10:03 a.m. local time. This follows a successful first test run in November, when a small debris sample weighing less than a gram was extracted using a special extendable device. TEPCO says more data is needed before full-scale debris removal can begin. The company is also upgrading its extraction equipment with a new camera to improve precision. 3 of the plant's 6 reactors melted down in the disaster. Last month, robots began removing radiation-absorbing sandbags from underground floors at the site. Meanwhile, Japan has been releasing treated wastewater from the plant into the Pacific Ocean since last year, a move supported by the International Atomic Energy Agency. However, the discharge has sparked backlash. China and Russia banned Japanese seafood imports, though Beijing recently said its independent testing of water and marine life near Fukushima found no irregularities. Still, China says more analysis is needed before lifting the ban. Moving on, and pop star Katy Perry and 5 other females have safely returned to Earth after reaching space aboard Jeff Bezos' Blue Origin rocket. The singer was joined by Bezos' fiancée, Lauren Sanchez, and CBS presenter Gayle King, who said a highlight of the flight was hearing Perry singing Louis Armstrong's What a Wonderful World. The flight lasted around 11 minutes and took the 6 women more than 100 kilometres above Earth, crossing the internationally recognised boundary of space and giving them a few moments of weightlessness. The capsule returned to Earth with a parachute-assisted soft landing, while the rocket booster also landed back in Texas. Interestingly, the last time an all-female spaceflight took place was over 60 years ago, when Soviet cosmonaut Valentina Tereshkova became the first woman to travel into space on a solo mission aboard the spacecraft Vostok 6. Let's listen in to what Katy Perry has said about takeoff.
I don't know if any other pop stars have been to space, but I thought I wasn't sure if I was going to sing or if I wasn't, because I just wanted to honor my fellow astronauts and just, hold the space in space.
Well, that is all that we have time for, but we will continue to bring you more of the latest breaking news from across the world.